Let's do record. Here we go. Welcome, official welcome to lesson 2, second week of Journey of the Soul. Thank you everyone for joining for this epic journey, no pun intended. As we start off with last week was kind of an introduction, setting the foundation, laying the groundwork of some very important Jewish perspectives. And this week, I think we're going to get into some more details. I don't want to use the word exciting, but in a way it is, because it's exciting because we're going to be discovering the Jewish perspective of why we do certain things, and it's going to bring us to a deeper understanding of different Jewish traditions. So I think that is exciting because when we understand things in a deeper way, I find that exciting personally. And illuminating, it brings meaning to everything that we do in the Jewish traditions, and it will help us relate to other people's experiences as they may be mourning the loss of a loved one, or maybe at a funeral, we may have questions, or we may be wondering what to say to others. And I think that everything we're going to be discovering tonight together will be helpful for that. So, they say there's a story of a woman. She comes to the rabbi, very, observant woman, very committed. She comes to the rabbi for a meeting. She says, "Rabbi, I just wanted you to take a look at my will. I wanted you to make sure that everything I put in here is kosher and is aligned appropriately with Jewish law." The rabbi says, "Oh, wow, that's a very big ask, very big, very big honor." And he takes a look and he's reading, "Yep, this makes sense. This is good. This is good." And he comes to the last part, and the woman writes as follows. She writes, "I do not, as in no, do not want to be buried in the Jewish cemetery." And the rabbi is all confused. He turns to the woman. He says, "What's going on? Why don't you want to be buried in the Jewish cemetery? You're so religious. You do everything appropriately. What type of request is this? Where do you want to be buried?" She said, "I want to be buried in Bloomingdale's." "Bloomingdale's? Why don't we be buried in Bloomingdale's?" She says, "Well, at least this way I know my daughters will come and visit me once in a while." So last week, we explored that a very fundamental concept. Just a quick recap of where we're coming from. We explored that life is not really the body. Life is not defined by our physical container, because a body without a soul is lifeless. Remember that glove? The hand goes in the glove and moves the gloves, animates the glove. The hand goes out of the glove can be can be thrown away. It's kind of worthless. And we explained last week that life really isn't about our physical body and our physical needs. Life is about our soul. And that's very comforting because our soul lives on forever. On the other hand, okay, that means, what does that tell us about our body? We're pretty much, that's how we feel, we think, we connect to this world through our body. So does our body play an important role? We said, yes, absolutely. We have an important mission, and when the soul's in our body, it's able to perform that mission. And that's why we have that interesting text, which said the soul doesn't want to be born, but it also doesn't want to pass on to the next world. Because as pleasurable as the next world is, the body knows how important this world is. But the soul continues to live on forever, and it just moves on to a better place and to its next stage. So that leaves us with a question. And the question is, all right, it's all nice and dandy. The soul is happy. The soul moves on to the next place. What about us? What about those that are left behind after a loved one passes away? So we can be happy for the soul of our loved one that it continues to live on, but we're physical people. Our soul's in our body. We relate to things in a physical way. We can no longer hug our loved ones. So it's great that the soul lives on, but what about that hug? What about that conversation? What about that companionship and that connection? Can we, tonight's lesson is going to revolve around the big question, can we connect to the souls of those that have departed? Can we connect with them? And can the souls of those that have left this world connect with us? Is there anything left? Or Does the soul say, hey, I had a nice life. I fulfilled my mission, my purpose. I'm really happy to move on. And I let this all go and I moved on and I'm happy. And I forgot about everything and there's no connection with everything I left behind. And if we left off at the end of last week's lesson, everything we learned about the soul, this may be the thought that enters our mind based on everything we learned until now. The soul's pretty happy in the next world, living this beautiful spiritual world. Seemingly, the soul would have no connection with this physical world that it left behind. And our question tonight is that really the case? Or is there a connection that we can have with the souls of those that have departed? And can they connect with us? It's a two-way relationship, right? We can connect with them, maybe yeah, maybe no. What about them? Can they feel us and hear us? And that is what we are going to be. The main discussion is going to revolve around this question, the soul connection that we have. We're going to also address the Jewish traditions that surround the care of the body of the deceased and the interments. We'll talk about the significance of different things that are done in the Jewish burial. And we're going to talk about the importance and the significance of visiting the grave of someone that has passed and left this world. So fasten up, put on your seatbelts. I hope that everyone will feel comfortable that in addition to the class aspect and the teachings and the readings from the textbook, that everyone will feel comfortable. If there's any questions or thoughts that you want to share as we're exploring some information you may be familiar with, some teachings may be new, I hope everyone will be comfortable to speak up and share what they're thinking, or if you have any questions, any discussion points, feel free to chime in. We'll take every 10 or 15 minutes or so, we'll break for a little discussion time. Okay, let's get our PowerPoint up and running. Thanks for bearing with me over here as I look for the share button. Let's see, we're going to go like this. I'm going to share the sound. And here we go. All right, now we're really live. Now it's really official. Okay. So we're going to talk about 4 different stages of the soul's journey to the next world. And when we do that, we'll have a great, and we'll go on a little bit of a journey with the soul, see what happens to the soul. We're going to look at Jewish texts and sources which teach us about different transitions that the soul takes. And this will all give us a better understanding to answer our original question: can we connect with the souls of those that have left? And do they connect with us? Are they listening? Are they still present? Are they still part of our lives? So we're going to talk about tonight the moment of passing, the process of the soul's departure to the next world, the care that we take of the body and interment, and the significance of visiting the grave. So the first stage, the first thing that happens is at the moment of passing. So based on what we spoke about last week, we'll pause the slideshow for a moment. Based on everything we learned last week until now, what would you say is happening at the moment of the passing? When a person hits 120, what happens when a person passes away?
The soul leaves, the
The soul
neshama.
leaves. Thank you. There we go. The soul departs, and the body is left lifeless because the soul is no longer there, even though the heart and the brain and all the organs are still there. But since the neshama left, there's no animation, there's no life force in the body. So the soul leaves the body, and as we discussed last week, a key teaching was that when Hashem created the first person, Adam and Eve, the Torah describes how he created the first man. First, he created the body, and then Hashem breathed the soul into Adam, the first man. And at the time of passing, all that happens is the soul leaves the body. Just like when the body was created, the soul first came the body, then came the soul. At the time of the passing, the soul leaves the body, and the soul continues to live on for eternity. But there's a little bit more that we didn't talk about last week. There's a little bit more to the story. We have to say something for this week. And that is as follows. The Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, teaches us that our soul really is comprised of 5 elements, 5 different parts to the soul. Now, it's not relevant. We're not going to get into all the details. We'll do a brief overview. You won't be tested on this. Don't worry. It's not important to know and remember all the details. What's most important are the first 3 levels, and the higher 2 levels we don't even need to talk about tonight. So the 5 dimensions of the soul are called nefesh, the ruach, the neshama, the chaya, and the yechida. Okay, so the higher 2 levels, chaya and yechida, are transcendent levels. We don't even need to touch on that tonight. But we're going to talk about the lower 3 elements or aspects or dimensions or pieces or parts. There's no word that can properly describe a part of a soul. A soul is a spiritual existence. We think in physical terms. Unless you're a biochemist, it's hard for us to understand what does it mean. There's different parts of the soul. But we're gonna leave that for another discussion. We're gonna trust the Kabbalah on this one. So the first level of the soul, we said it's called nefesh, which literally is translated as soul. All right. Any of the 5 levels I just said, you can translate them as soul. But what does it really mean? On a deeper level, the nefesh, which is the lowest level of the soul, is the life force of the soul that animates the body and gives basic bodily function to the body through the power of the nefesh. So if you're going to touch something, you're going to feel something. My hand is moving, my mouth is talking, I'm thinking, my head is moving. That is empowered by the level of nefesh of the soul. But there's more to a person than just moving your hands and touching and speaking. There's a very important part of us is our feelings, how we relate to things, our emotional makeup. And that comes from a second level of the soul, and that is called the ruach. The ruach means spirit. The spirit gives, energizes and animates all the emotions and the feelings that we go through here in this world. And the third level is the neshama. That is the intellectual reality that we live with, our thought process, that we can comprehend and understand things. That comes from the power of our neshama. But we're really going to be focusing on these 2 lower levels. Again, the nefesh is the soul, which animates the body so that we can move our bodily functions. We can move our hands, we can talk, we can touch things, we can see things, we can smell things. And then the ruach is the spirit, is a higher level. That's the emotions and the feelings that we go through. So when we talk about the soul departing the body at the moment of death, it's actually very nuanced. And it's not, the soul departs. Well, hold on, we just learned there are 5 different dimensions of the soul. So what exactly departs? What exactly happens? So thankfully, we don't have to guess because the Kabbalah tells us exactly what happens. Let's take a look at our screen over here. We have the nefesh, which is the lowest level of the soul, which gives energy to the physical life. And we have the ruach, which gives energy and animates the emotions of a person. And this is what happens at the time of the departure of a soul after 120. The nefesh, the lowest level of the neshama, we're used to the word neshama, the soul, remains in the grave with the body. And we're going to take a look at some Jewish texts, which will share more details about what exactly that means and where this nefesh, hovers over or lives, so to say. But the nefesh, a part of our soul, or if a part of someone's soul which is deceased, remains with them in the grave. Which, by the way, right away answers one of our questions: why is it significant to visit a gravesite? For example, let's say my grandmother, for argument's sake, loves Starbucks coffee. She didn't. She was from Russia. she drank hot tea, probably never stepped foot into Starbucks. But let's say she did, right? And her yard site is coming up. So an appropriate thing to do, you would think, is to go into Starbucks and buy a coffee in honor of my grandma who loved Starbucks coffee. Yet Jewish tradition doesn't tell us to do that. I mean, it's not a bad thing. You can do that too, but as long as it's kosher coffee. But Jewish tradition says on the yard site you should visit the grave site of the person that is deceased. Why? We can right away understand, on a very basic level, without getting into more details, there's a part of the soul which remains at the grave. It's not in Starbucks. You want to communicate and talk to someone who's passed. When you go to the grave site, you're right there. You're talking to them. You're talking to their soul, which is the most important part of who they are. It's really, like we said last week, it's not about a person's body. It's about their soul. That's who the person really is. So you want to connect with the person that's departed. You can go to the gravesite and you can connect very, very strongly and deeply with the nefesh, with the lowest level of the soul, which remains in the grave. But there's more to it. The ruach, which we said is the second level of the neshama, which energizes and allows us to have emotions. The ruach and the higher levels of the soul, they go on to the next world. They depart and they move on to the next world. But they're forever connected to us through the nefesh, the lowest level of the soul. Because of course, all 5 parts of the soul are connected to each other. So it's like having a long, I don't know, I don't have a good example for this. So it's the beginning of the signal. And there's always that connection that remains even after somebody departs from this world. Okay, any questions, comments? Is this totally new? Is it a little bit new?
Totally new.
Go ahead, Sherry.
I was just going to say, we don't only have to go to visit on the yard site, we can go other times too.
Correct. Yes. Yes. There are other times. Well, really, we'll talk about visiting the gravesite a little bit later.
Oh,
But there are other times before the holidays. And there are other times that are appropriate. But anytime a person feels that they want to connect, they can go to, visit the gravesite. Earl, did you say something before?
I said it was totally new to me.
Totally new. Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. It was already worth it. You can go to sleep for the rest of the class, and I'm just kidding. There's more to come. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. So I think we have this clear. I think we went through this well. We have the 2 levels of the soul. One of the levels at the time of passing stays with the body, and it's forever stays together with the body. We're going to take a look in our workbook, excuse me, in our textbook, text 1a on page 43, and we're going to see a beautiful letter which was penned by the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, and he wrote this letter to the students of one of his colleagues, and perhaps maybe even a friend, another great leader, and his name was Reb Mendel Haradoker, because he came from the city of Haradak. There are no last names. Last names were just starting to be introduced in the Alter Rebbe's time in Russia. By the way, you know why they introduced last names? It's for tax purposes. They want to be able to track people and collect taxes. So for real. So the Alter Rebbe, his colleague's name was Reb Mendel Haradoker. He needed a last name. He didn't have a last name. You call him by the town of where the person is from. Reb Mendel Haradoker was a beloved leader. Thousands of disciples were dedicated, devoted to him, followed his every word and every move. And Reb Mendel Haradoker passed away. And they were devastated. How are they going to continue? Who's going to direct them? Who's going to guide them? Their teacher, their mentor is no longer here. And the Alter Rebbe wrote a letter of consolation to the students of Reb Mendel Haradoker, which we're going to read right now on page 43. Do we have any volunteers? Anyone wants to read for us?
I can read it if you want me to.
Yeah, sure.
As it is known, the life of the
tzaddik.
His righteous person is not physical but spiritual. It consists of faith, reverence, and love for God. During the Chiddik's lifetime on earth, these three attributes that belong to the soul dimension of Rauch are constrained within their container and garb, and namely the nefesh that is bound to the corporal body. This imposes the restraints of physical space upon these attributes. As a result, all the Chiddik's disciples receive but a glow of those Ruach attributes, a mere ray that is emitted beyond the container by means of the
Tzaddiks.
of its holy words and thoughts. The inability to receive direct from the Ruach is a revolutionary handicap, and therefore our sages stated that it takes 40 years for students to fully plumb the depths of their master's teachings. By contrast, after the Chiddik's passing, the nefesh separates from the Ruach and remains in the grave, while the Ruach and its three attributes rise to Gan Eden. Consequently, whoever is close to the Tzaddik can receive directly from his Ruach in Gan Eden, because the Ruach is no longer restrained in a container or confined to a physical space. There is now a straightforward path for the Tziddik's disciples to connect with the essence of their master's Ruach, the faith, awe, and love with which the Tzaddik serve God, and not merely those attributes, outer glow that escape beyond their container. The disciples connect and receive commensurate to the degree of their loving connection and closeness to the Tzaddik during their lifetime and after his death. By the transmission of all things, spiritual is always by means of great love.
Thank you, Larry, helping me with my lingering sore throat. So what we just read here is really powerful and a little deep. So let me break this down and we'll go through this together. The Alter Rebbe wrote to the students of Reb Mendel, of course you're sad. I don't think he wrote this, but it's given that you're sad, right, upon the passing of your teacher. That's a good thing. We should be sad. It means that we felt connected to that person. We miss them. If we're not sad, that's a problem. So that's a good response, a good emotional response. But he wanted to uplift them and console them, and he shared with them something very deep. And that is that a tzaddik, we mentioned this briefly last week, is a righteous person. A tzaddik is someone which lives with faith in God, reverence for the Torah, mitzvos, and for Hashem, and love of God. Their whole life is a spiritual life, and they have absolutely no desire for physical, material needs and for riches. Everything is in their life is all about the spiritual, which means that their entire life is dedicated to the soul, which is their true essence of who a person is. Who are we? We said last week, we're our soul. That's who the real us are. Our body is just the way that the soul expresses itself here in this world. But the real core of who a person is, they're really their soul. And we get to live forever because that's who we really are. The tzaddik is someone which never lived a physical life. He lived physically here in this world, but his life was never about the physical, about his body. I promised you that tzaddik wasn't shooting hoops and trying to get, get in a certain amount of laps under a certain amount of minutes. That wasn't, maybe everyone has to exercise, it's great, but that wasn't what his life was about. His life was about spirituality. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe writes to his students, when you tried connecting with your mentor, with your teacher here in this world, you were limited. Why? Because your teacher's ruach, which is his spirit, that second level of the soul, is stuck in this container of the body. So if you want to connect with your teacher, with who your teacher really is, with their soul, you have to go through the body. You had to make an appointment. If you lived in one place, you had to go somewhere else to go visit him. You have to arrange that physical meeting. You have to make an appointment, wait a couple of months. But now that the tzaddik passes away, look at what happens. During the lifetime, you're limited to expression through the nefesh. But if you want to connect to the higher part of this person, the tzaddik, the ruach, it's more difficult during the lifetime. But after the tzaddik passes away, the ruach, that second level of the neshama, is unleashed, and now it's out of this containment. It's out of jail. I'll give an example. Anytime you give an example to try to explain something spiritual, it's never a good example, because spiritual and physical, they don't always, you can try to bring an example, but it's never going to be perfect. So I'll give an example. It won't be perfect, but I think it does the job. And today we know if you sign up for internet, it used to be 100 megabits per second. It was like, wow, super fast. Now, if 300 is regular, 1,000 megabits per second, a gigabit is like the future of internet. Or if you have a TV and you're streaming, so it used to be like 4K. 4K was amazing, high definition. Well, guess what we have today? I'm pretty sure we have 8K, right? Am I right? I'm pretty sure we have 8K. 8K is really good, right? So imagine you sign up for an 8K signal. You're like, wow, you have this massive screen. You're never going to have anything that's being streamed live. You won't even have a lag of a half a second. You'll see everything beautifully in the moment. But there's one problem. The problem is that you still have your TV from the 1980s. So you have this great 8K signal and connection, but you have no way to properly use that signal. So you're watching TV and you're watching the weather, the news, whatever, and it's grainy, or there's lines going, streaks going through your monitor. You can barely hear. You have the best signal ever, but you don't have the right vessel to be able to connect to that great signal. So I think what the Alter Rebbe was telling the students of Reb Mendel, that yes, your teacher has passed, but now you're able to bypass the body. You're able to connect with the soul, with the spirit of your teacher in a much deeper and greater way, even during his own lifetime. Yes, of course, we still want the physical, and we mourn the loss of the physical connection, but there's a silver lining, is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. He's not saying it's great. Once everyone passes away, your connection is much stronger and everyone should pass away. No, he's saying there's a silver lining here. That is that now you can connect with your teacher in a much greater way, in a much stronger way. That 8K signal, that gigabit signal, you're going to be able to really take advantage of it, because there's no body restraining the ruach, which is the spirit of the person, into their body. Any questions? So let's take a look at our next text, text 1b, on page 45. Any volunteers to read?
I'll read.
Thank you, Sherry.
It is also a matter of common sense that whatever the direct cause of the separation of the soul from the body, whether a fatal accident or a fatal illness, etc., it could affect only any of the vital organs of the physical body, but could in no way affect the spiritual soul. A further point, which is also understandable, is that during the soul's lifetime on earth in partnership with the body, the soul is necessarily handicapped in certain respects by the requirements of the body, such as eating and drinking, etc. Even a tzaddik, whose entire life is consecrated to Hashem, cannot escape the restraints of life in a material and physical environment. Consequently, when the time comes for the soul to return home, it is essentially a release, for it is as it makes its ascent to a higher world, no longer restrained by a physical body and physical environment. Henceforth, the soul is free to enjoy the spiritual bliss of being near to Hashem in the fullest measure. Wow.
Thank you. Wow.
Pithy.
Exactly.
Very pithy.
Yes. So what happens at the moment of death? We started out a little bit ago. We said that's when the soul departs and leaves the body. So now we added a few ideas over here. Number one, we said only part of the soul, or 4/5 of the soul, leaves the body, but the lowest level of the soul always remains with the body. And now we're saying not only that, the soul leaves the body, and therefore you are able to connect with the soul of the person, your loved one, of your friend, in a much greater and stronger way, in a more real way, because their soul, their ruach, is unleashed. There are people that part of the Chabad work that we do here in the community. So I have the opportunity to visit patients at Northwest Community Hospital every Thursday. So I spend almost the entire day visiting Jewish and non-Jewish patients at Northwest Community Hospital. And part of the responsibilities of being a chaplain in the hospital is, a big part of it is spending time with the families that their loved ones are leaving this world. And sometimes people will tell me, after someone has passed away, many times the grief is unbelievable, the shock is there, depending on the situation, and you get to see, it's really a humbling, opportunity to see people at the most vulnerable moments of their lives when they're dealing with the passing of a loved one. And sometimes people will say, I saw like a flash, or like I felt something. Well, what did you feel? They can't describe it, but they felt that there's a flash, a light, a connection at the time of the passing of a person. In a way, you're able to connect in a much stronger way because you're focusing on the soul. And some people even have that experience, and I think it makes sense. It's not that they're going cuckoo or I think it's real. I think there's something real there, that they have that flash of very deep, strong connection with the soul of the person that has just departed this world. So there's a lot of information here. For some of this, for some of you, this may be totally new. For some of you, this may be, you've heard these concepts before, but here's more details in a much deeper way. So we're going to have a meditation video to help us focus on these ideas and see how it relates to everything that may be going through the back of our minds, and try to bring this home and make it a little more personal. So here we go.
How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear? That's what psychologists call inattentional blindness. And no, it is not a condition to be concerned about. In fact, life would be impossible without it. Let me explain. As powerful as the human brain may be, it is easily overwhelmed by the sheer onslaught of observation, calculation, sight, sound, and signals that envelop our every waking hour. The brain cannot permit itself to register and record each image and movement, every message and stimulation. Instead, our brains and nervous systems aggressively filter and limit our intake to manageable levels. The result? We notice a fraction and ignore the fullness, and remember far less. Often, we purposely engage in what cognitive neuroscientists call selective attention, like focusing on a dinner partner in a crowded restaurant, while tuning out all other conversations in the room. Now imagine that you had the ability to absorb everything around you, to absorb, comprehend, and recall all the details, and fetch every memory at will, without being overwhelmed. That is the incredible experience of the human soul once it detaches from the body at the close of a lifetime. Unshackled from the frailties of a nervous system, unrestricted by networks of neurons, it is unbelievably free and powerfully present. It is free to absorb truths that mortal minds cannot contain, present to delight in the divine radiance that courses through the cosmos, to bask in divine understanding that supersedes human senses, but is savored by the newly liberated soul.
Okay, the meditation, I'm sorry, is going to come in a minute, but very powerful video over there. Let me do a quick recap, right? So everything we've been learning and discussing until this moment is we've been started off with the Kabbalah. Jewish mysticism teaches us about the moment of the passing of a person. We said that at that moment, the soul leaves the body, and this idea and all the details of the nefesh and the ruach speaks volumes about our central question: can we be connected to our loved ones who have passed, and are they connected to us? And the obvious answer is, after all this, yes, 1000%. And not only can we remain connected, but in a way, being that the soul is unleashed from the body, unrestricted, no longer contained, the soul is more alive than when it was alive in the body. It's more alive now. And therefore, we can be even more connected to our loved ones because we don't need to go through the body to connect to them. So we have two truths at the same time. During the Shiva, and everyone has their own time period for grieving, there's no limit on grieving. But even as we mourn the loss of the physical, that lack of ability, like we said before, to touch, to talk, to communicate, companionship, to be together in the physical world, but we also can celebrate the deeper connection that we're able to attain with our loved ones. And now we're going to go to our video meditation.
Welcome to our meditation reflection for Lesson 2 of Journey of the Soul. We're going to try to visualize and relate to the idea of the continuing connection between those who are still inhabiting this world and their loved ones who have moved on. How can we visualize this connection? So I want to share with you a metaphor that was given by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to a grieving family when they lost their dear mother. The Rebbe told the family, you should know that your loved one, when they pass away, hasn't gone to some faraway place. Really, what is the situation? It's as if the whole family is together on the first floor of the house, and this loved one is in the same house with you on the second floor. So we're going to try to visualize. Again, if it helps you to close your eyes, you can close your eyes. If you want to leave your eyes open, leave your eyes open. But start to visualize in your mind's eye a loved one who's passed on. Try to imagine what it was like when you would gather and that person was physically with you. Try to remember the sights, the sounds, the whole setting. And now, imagine that exact same gathering, same setting, and that loved one who's passed on is still there with one difference. They're on the second floor. Take a moment to imagine the feeling. It's hard to describe it, but if we envision it, we may be able to feel it. What does it feel like? The knowledge that this loved one you may not be able to see them, but they're right there, very, very close by, in the same house, where the family is together, everyone is there, and the only difference is they're upstairs, they're on the second floor. Let's try to envision, let's try to visualize a loved one. Try to remember what it was like when they were on the first floor. And now think about the exact same setting. What does it feel like? What does it feel like knowing that they're on the second floor? They're with us. They're with us. They're in the same house. They're only just a few feet away. Not far, far, far away. Very close by on the second floor. Take a half a minute to visualize and try to connect to this feeling of the loved one on the second floor.
Would anyone like to share what thought or feeling came to your mind, your consciousness, as you were thinking about the presence of a loved one being so close on the second floor?
I still share my bed with my wife, and I have some personal things next to me, and we are sleeping together.
Beautiful closeness. You're still together. She's still there with you. Beautiful. Julie, go ahead.
I felt my mom's presence and some peace, that she was close to me just on the second level as opposed to the first level.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
I have a picture of myself and my husband, my late husband, and every once in a while it's crooked, and I have to straighten it. And I say, I know you're thinking of me, and I'm thinking of you. It's like strange.
Beautiful. It's true. There's no question. There's a connection.
And my grandson comes to me too.
That's the one who you have the Torah for, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyone else? So we have already some very powerful ideas, but there's so much more. So we're gonna keep going. What happens at the? I'm gonna stop the screen for a second. What happens after the moment of passing? We said, okay, the nefesh stays, the ruach goes on. What happens next? So at the moment of passing, there's a separation that takes place with the higher levels of the soul moving on to the next world. But there's also a process of this transition. So let's take a step back. Let me ask you, based on everything we're learning and discussing about the soul and the journey of the soul, do you think it's painful for the soul when it leaves the body? Is the soul in pain? I'm not talking about the body. We're just talking about the soul. Is the soul in pain? Is it difficult for the soul to move on to the next part of its journey? So you can nod, you can go ahead and chime in. Go ahead, yeah, Julie, just chime in.
I just think it just knows it's supposed to go and it just goes.
Yeah.
Well, it might have gotten used to being with the body. It
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
come in the first place, but now after,
After all this you
time,
hope that's right. It's 100% beautiful. Everyone's right. Based on what we learned until now, the soul should be really happy. It's continuing to live. For the soul, it's actually even better for the soul. It's no longer constrained by the body. But like Arnie and Sherry were saying, the body over time, it's here in this world. It connected with the soul, connected with the body. It said, hey, there's something to this. It's like a love-hate relationship where they always need each other. The body needs the soul for its life source. The soul needs the body to be able to express itself, to do mitzvahs, to do good deeds, to be able to relate to this physical world. But at the same time, the body is pulling the soul towards physical, material, pleasurable ideas, and the soul just wants to bask in the spiritual, and they're fighting their whole life. It's almost like, an older couple comes to the bet din. They say, we want a divorce. We want a divorce. You're in your 90s. What are you talking about? We want a divorce. We've had enough. We can't stand each other. And they're there, and they're bickering, and they're this and they're that. And then all of a sudden, Yankel turns to Sprinz and says, Sprinz, just don't forget to take your heart medicine, and don't forget this medicine. She says, oh, Yankel, don't forget you need your medicine. You want a divorce? I'm sorry, no divorce, right? So you're bickering, you've been together for 50, 60, 70 years, but you're inseparable. You love each other. You're so connected. And the soul is, it bickers with the body. The body wants to do physical, and the soul wants to do spiritual, but they've grown to get to love each other. There's a connection there. So the soul, to some degree, does have, it is in pain. I don't know how to describe pain for a soul, but it's sad and it's pain that it has to leave this body. And we said last week, there was this great sage, his name was Rabbi Yehuda. He was crying when he was on his deathbed. His student said, why are you crying? He said he's crying because he can no longer do a mitzvah. The soul knows that its mission in this world is now complete, and it's no longer able to accomplish all the great things that it can only do while it's here in this world. So we're going to talk about what happens to the soul, excuse me, and how that transition takes place in just a moment. I want to share a couple of slides. I need to get our slideshow back on. Thank you for bearing with me. So we have end of life comfort. So obviously it's a very difficult time, end of life, very emotional time. And these are some ideas that I actually try to share with families of loved ones when the loved ones are in their final days, weeks, or moments. How do you relate to them? How do you, what do you do? What do you not do? What shouldn't you do? What shouldn't you do? So you want to reminisce about good memories. You want it to be a good vibe, a good atmosphere, because the soul, even if the person isn't responding, even science agrees with this to some degree, but we know that the soul, the neshama, is listening, and the soul feels your presence there. So you want to have a good atmosphere. You don't want to be like, oh, this is terrible. This is. You want to talk about good times. Oh, remember the good times. Talk about good, happy things. Physical contact, holding hands can be very comforting. Or sometimes just being there, just being in the room of someone which is at the end of life, spending time together, the person senses your presence. And of course, a comforting atmosphere, music therapy, or whatever the person would appreciate to help create a good atmosphere. These are all things in the medical world that I talk about to do at a time of end of life. And this helps create, this is what we do at the end of life for a loved one. We try to create, if we're lucky enough to have this opportunity, to create an atmosphere where the soul is at peace. And as the soul moves on to the next world, it's not hearing bickering, fighting. It's not hearing, God forbid, about funeral plans. in the presence of a person that's dying. Actually, Jewish law strictly prohibits talking if someone's, their final moments of life or hours, and you're talking about the funeral plans, and you want to talk about positive, happy things in their presence, because we're sending off the soul, the neshama, in a very happy and positive note. So we mentioned, why is it difficult for the soul to leave this world? One idea is it's the ultimate transition. Any change is difficult. You start a new job, you go to a new school, you move somewhere. It's difficult. We're creatures of habit. We like our routines. We like to be with people that we're comfortable with. Going into a new setting, a new social network can be daunting for some people. The neshama, the soul, it got used to this life here in this world. So it's a transition for it to move on to the next world. So just that transition is difficult and perhaps even painful to some degree for the neshama. And like we said before, the soul knows it can no longer do a mitzvah, and a powerful bond between the soul and the body is now broken, and the soul is in pain for that. So while the soul is happy to go back to its spiritual, blissful, pleasurable life, but there is some pain and sadness as the soul leaves this world. So now we're going to get into a couple of texts. I'm going to learn about the different stages of the soul's departure from the body. Let's go to page 49. And I'm looking for someone to read the text 3, 4a, 4b, and 4c for us.
I'll read.
Thank you.
For 3 days, the soul hovers above the body, thinking that it can return to it. After 3 days, when it sees that the body's face has changed, it leaves the body and departs. For 7 days, the soul goes from the house where it lived to the grave, and from the grave back to the house, and it mourns its body. After 7 days, the body is subjected to its fate, and the soul ascends to its place. Do I read 48?
Yeah, keep going.
For 30 days, the soul and the body are judged as one, and thus the soul is located down here on earth. After that, the soul ascends while the body erodes into the earth.
And then one more, 4c.
For 12 months, the body still exists, and the soul ascends and descends. After 12 months, the body becomes null, and the soul rises and no longer returns.
Thank you, Julie.
So for 12 months it goes on, or more than 12 months?
So let's dissect this. Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
If you want to be a little picky, if you're studying Talmud and you're looking at all these texts, which come from different sources, the Talmud, the Zohar, the Jerusalem Talmud, you're like, hold on a second, this contradicts each other. First we say 3 days, then we say 7 days, then we say 30 days, then we say 12 months. How long does it take for the soul to journey on to the next world? Which one is it? And the answer is, it's all of them. Because we all know that it's a process. When we lose somebody, grieving is a process. It takes time. There may be denial at first, there may be shock, and then there's processing it, and then finally there's acceptance. And it can take, for some people, they can never, they're still grieving. There's no time limit on how long any person can be grieving for. It's a personal journey that every person takes. But every time we have a loss, or it doesn't have to be the loss of a person, it can be the loss of an opportunity. There are stages, and nothing happens in one moment. It takes time to process what's happening to us. And the same thing is true with the soul. When the soul leaves this body, its body and this world, there's a process. There's a transition that's taking place. And we're not going to delve into all the details of each of these texts, but there's different things that the soul is going through at different time periods. I'll give an example. Someone goes away from home for the first time in their life. They're younger, they're going to college. They've never gone to a srui or any sleepaway camps. They're leaving home for the very first time. It's a big, exciting day. They get in their car, and maybe their parents drive them down to college, and then next day they're all on their own. And guess what? It's a massive adjustment. They're calling their mom or texting every couple hours. They're always in touch, and their heart, and they really want to be at home. And it's a big adjustment. But as time goes on, they begin to make some friends. They get comfortable, and their heart and their soul and their body, they're in college, and every once in a while they need more cash. They'll remember to call back home, right? But it doesn't happen overnight. It's a transition. It takes some time. And the same thing is true with the soul. At the time of passing, there is a separation, and the disengagement from the body, it grows in stages. Here's something amazing, which is that everything we just spoke about from these sources in the Zohar and the Talmud, the different stages of the journey of the soul, parallels exactly the mourning process that Jewish law lays out for us. Let's take a look at text number 5 on page 52. Now again, there's no limit. Jewish law, Maimonides, is not telling us that there's a limit on how long you can grieve for. But they're setting the framework of what the emphasis and the focus should be on different periods of mourning. And there is no time limit, and you don't have to, if the person's like, well, Jewish law says 3 days, and it took me 4 days, it's okay, it's fine. But Maimonides is telling us what the emphasis is on during different time periods. So let's take a look at text number 5. Mourners observe 3 days of weeping, 7 days of eulogies, that's the Shiva, and for 30 days, restrictions on haircuts and wearing freshly ironed clothing, marrying, joining celebration of friends, and traveling on business. Let's take a look right into text number C. This is from the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. If you encounter an acquaintance within 30 days of that person having lost the next of kin, offer words of consolation and avoid the customary pleasantries. If 30 days have elapsed since the relative's passing, greet your acquaintance in the usual manner and offer indirect words of consolation. Avoid mentioning the deceased by name and extend a generic consolation such as, may you be comforted. If your acquaintance is mourning the loss of a parent, you should offer direct messages of comfort for the first 12 months, and only after that, scale it back to indirect consolation. We'll talk about grieving and mourning more at length next week, but we're seeing over here is that the distinct stages in the departure of the soul from the body directly relates to the mourning period that Jewish law lays out. Let's take a look at the screen. So the first text we said is that the body for 3 days is going from the house back and forth, is by the gravesite. So that's the soul hovers over the body. The second text tells us about the Shiva, the 7 days. The soul is, I think it's, help me out over here, vacillates between the grave and its home. That's what's happening during the Shiva. And that's a milestone. There's another milestone called the Shloshim, 30 days. And then we said the soul is still located here on this earth. You hit 30 days, that's another milestone in mourning. The next one is 12 months, and the soul vacillates between heaven and earth. And finally, after 12 months, the soul finds the 4 higher levels of the soul, finds its place in the world to come, and is at peace, and knows that it's not coming back here to this world. But still, the lowest level of the soul, the nefesh, always remains at the gravesite. So this is something which I think is pretty fascinating. You see how everything from the spiritual side of things and the Jewish legal side of things, how it lines up, and nothing is, and nothing is a mistake. But here's something even more meaningful. We normally talk about mourning the loss of a loved one, so we're the one that's in pain. But based on everything we're learning, if we paid close attention to the text that Julie read, we see that the soul is also hovering. It's going from the gravesite to the home to its home. It's all over the place. until 12 months where it's finally really at peace and at rest. So when we're going through a mourning period, we're actually mourning not just the loss of the body of a person, but we're mourning with their soul. We're mourning actually with them, which is quite amazing. So we don't mourn for the soul, we're mourning with the soul, because the soul is also very sad that it's no longer here in this world, and like we said, it's running all over the place to a certain degree. Text number 7 is an interesting text. I'll share the context. I'll just share it outside. There was once there's a law. If a person passes away and they have no relatives, a minyan, a quorum of people, should go to the house of the deceased during the Shiva. And the question is, why? Well, it once happened in Rabbi Yehuda's neighborhood. Someone passed away with no family, and Rabbi Yehuda gathered a minyan. They went to this person's home every day. And after the Shiva, Rabbi Yehuda had a dream, and the person came to him in a dream and said that you have comforted me and you have put my mind at rest. Because we're not just mourning for our loss, but we're mourning for the soul, which is on its own journey at this moment. Any questions?
Rabbi, my late husband passed away. It was the fast of Gedalia.
Uh-huh.
So we had a very short Shiva.
Right.
And we promised him 7 days, but we couldn't.
That's right.
And then Shloshim was shortened because of Sukkot. And I could see, for us, I felt that it shortened what we really needed.
Right. Yes. So for those that are not familiar, Jewish law says that if there's a holiday that comes up in the middle of the 7 days of mourning, the 7 days of mourning are interrupted. And can you imagine if, God forbid, somebody passes away and they're buried the day before Sukkot, there is no Shiva. I have a friend who's my age, and very sadly, he lost his mother. He's in his low 30s, and he lost his mother. And it happened right before Sukkot. And he literally had 1 day for Shiva, and that was it. And yes, it's very difficult for the mourners to not have that opportunity to have the full Shiva. But on a spiritual level, the spiritual power of the holiday helps the soul. It accelerates the process for the soul. And that's why, because on the spiritual level, the soul journey has been accelerated. So we're not left with that mourning period down here. But yes, it is difficult for those that don't have the full Shiva, because the Shiva, in addition to the spiritual aspect, is a very good opportunity from a mental health perspective for the person to be able to share their grief and to dwell upon the positive aspect, be surrounded by friends and family, and recount good stories and good memories with the deceased.
Thank you. I feel better now.
Okay. Thank you for sharing.
We didn't give short shrift.
Does Jewish law have any bearing on pre-planning a funeral? It was a comfort to me that we had everything pre-planned at the time.
So it's yes, thank you for sharing. And Larry, I remember you told me this about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, when your wife passed away. They had everything pre-planned, and you don't have to worry about anything. It's amazing, right?
Correct.
So funeral homes love it because they get all the money coming in, consider, either in full or yearly or monthly, whatever the plan is. So it's more revenue for them, but it's an amazing blessing. And it actually says, Jewish law says that it's a segula. It's no good word to translate segula, but it's meritorious. It's the opposite of superstitious, right? It's a good thing for a person to have a burial plot already chosen out and paid for. And it doesn't mean that you're getting ready for 120. it's a good thing for a person to have a will and to have a burial plot and to have arrangements taken care of. It's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. There's no bad omen or bad spell that you're casting upon, a person's casting on themselves if they take care of their arrangements. It's a big blessing to the family. So the children don't are total shock and they have to deal with putting a funeral. They have no idea what to do. So it's a very good thing to do. Now, Jewish law doesn't say that you should prepay everything, and but that's still a good thing. But Jewish law does say, Jewish teachings tell us that you should have your plot and a will is a positive thing. An added bonus is if you have everything paid for and taken care of, you're doing a great favor to your children and loved ones. So, any other questions, comments? So we've answered 2 questions, right? Can we remain connected to the soul of our loved ones or anyone that has departed? Are they connected with us? Absolutely. Not only are we connected with them, we're connected with them even in a stronger way on a spiritual level than when they were here in this world with us physically, because we're connecting with the full 8K signal strength. We're not inhibited by the body. And we did say that, yes, it is painful for the soul to leave this world because the soul is connected to its body and to this world. And it is a difficult, I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, again, I can't describe difficult or pain about something spiritual like the soul, but there is that idea over there. And now we're going to have a little shift to another related subject, and that is the Jewish traditions connected with the preparation of the body for burial. Does someone have a question? I thought I heard someone. Okay. We're going to skip some of these. Pre-burial rites and rules. So the body remains holy and sacred even as the soul separates, right? You would think that because the soul has moved on, the body can dispose of the body. There's nothing, right? Who cares what we do with the body? We say, no. Right? You think that's why I said the analogy with the hand and the glove is not a perfect analogy. Because even when you take the hand out of the glove is worthless. You take the soul out of the body isn't worthless. The body is holy and sacred and needs to be respected and given the proper dignity that the body deserves, because the body and the soul are partners. The body contained the soul, and there's such a strong connection between the body and the soul. We don't just say the soul left. One level of the soul always stays connected to the body. And therefore, because of this connection that it has, the body is very holy, and there are certain ways that it's important to take care of the body. So here are certain things in every Jewish community. Here in Arlington Heights, we have Shalom Memorial. There are many Jewish cemeteries, but even in small Jewish communities, you'll have a Jewish cemetery, and you'll have what's called a Chevra Kadisha. Has anyone heard of that term before? The Chevra Kadisha literally means the holy assembly or the brotherhood. And it's not just, it's Chevra. So Chevra means like a group. Kadisha means holy. And there's a Chevra Kadisha of men, and there's a Chevra Kadisha of women. And their job is to prepare the body for burial. So this is what happens behind the scenes. At Shalom Memorial, they have a room in the back, and in Chicago Jewish funeral homes, they have in Buffalo Grove and in Skokie, they have a special room dedicated for what's called a tahara. Tahara means purification. In the Jewish tradition, the body, even after the passing and the departure of the soul, is given tremendous respect and honor. And one of the things that we do before the body is put into the casket the Chevra Kadisha, this brotherhood or sisterhood, men will come for a deceased male and women will come for a deceased female. They will come and gently wash the body. They'll recite certain prayers connected with purification and atonement, asking for forgiveness, and they will dress the deceased in the traditional burial shrouds. And it's done with the most utmost respect and dignity. So here are a few rules that the Chevra Kadisha follows. So as mentioned, the body is handled with respect and dignity. The body is gently washed and dressed in the burial shrouds. There's no casual conversation. So the brotherhood or sisterhood that's attending to the deceased, they're not sitting and schmoozing and catching up or yenting. They're very focused on the task at hand, doing their job in a very respectful way, not talking about anything unrelated to the task at hand. The body is not completely covered. The certain parts of the body, the head and the private parts of the person, are kept covered, except for during the cleansing and the dressing of the person. So again, it's with utmost respect, where the body is covered as much as possible, except for the direct area which is being attended to. The body is never placed face down. It's considered disrespectful. And there's something called a shomer. Ideally, between the passing of a person and the burial, there should always be a Jewish person next to the deceased. They don't have to be literally next to him. In Shalom Memorial, they have a shomer room, and in all the funeral homes, they have a room where a shomer, a guard, can stay, and they can recite Psalms, they can study Torah, or even just being there shows tremendous respect to the deceased. And the deceased is not just something which, all right, it's just the body, but no, this isn't just the body. It's something much more than that. It has to be treated with tremendous respect. Let's take a look at text number 10 on page 58. Anyone that didn't read yet, we'd love to have your input. Arnie, how about you? Do you want to read page 58, text number 10?
I'll try. It'll be a cold reading. We are required. I meant I hadn't prepared it. We are required to maintain constant watch over a corpse, even during the daytime, and even if there is no cause to suspect that something can happen to the body. Those who maintain watch are actively performing a mitzvah to the extent that they are meanwhile absolved from many other mitzvot, such as reading the Shema and reciting the Shema and reciting the prayers at the appropriate times. We maintain a watch over the dead out of respect, for if we were to leave the body alone, it would appear as if we have abandoned it like a utensil that we no longer require.
Wow, look at this. Like a utensil that we no longer require. If we just leave the deceased body overnight in the morgue or the funeral home unattended, it's so disrespectful. So we have a shomer, a guard that always stays to show tremendous. We're not worried about theft. We have locks on all the doors and video cameras. It's just a sign of tremendous respect that we give to the deceased, because the body, again, has this holiness to it and has something very special and important all about it. Any questions about the preparation for the burial, the tahara, or this part of the journey? Yes, Julie.
I have a question. Since this just happened to my mom and we didn't do the tahara, I'm still okay. Our family's still okay because it was done at Shalom in their private room.
So I think we spoke about the tahara, and you told me that they agreed and they did the tahara.
No, we couldn't do the tahara because my mom didn't want that and my brother didn't want that.
Okay. So the tahara is a very important part, but it's not. But the most important part is the burial, right? So you did the burial, and that was, that's what was necessary. But I thought Rabbi Doug had told me that they did do the tahara.
Maybe they did, and I was not aware.
Yeah, I think when we spoke, it was done. But either way, this is an important part. The most important part is the burial of a person, and we're going to talk now about the Jewish view on burial. So here's an interesting statistic. If I recall correctly, in the 1960s, they did a survey, and how many, not of Jewish funeral homes, of all funeral homes, what would you guess the percentage of cremations were in the 1960s?
Very small.
Very small, right?
Yeah.
Today, it was 3.5%. Let me get my numbers right, because I don't want to give you the wrong information. Right now, we're at 65%.
Wow.
Of people choose cremation over burial. This isn't in the Jewish world. Nationally, we're very, very high percentage of people are choosing cremation for a variety of reasons. Generally, it's cost. It's cheaper, much cheaper to do a cremation. So if we don't have the Jewish value of how sacred and important the body is, then like the text we read in text number 10, you can treat the body like a utensil that has, and it can be cremated. Cremation is, we're going to talk about why it's important, why the Jewish view is that one should lay their loved ones to rest in the earth, and why we're not, why cremation is forbidden according to Jewish law. Let's take a look at text number 12 on page 61. This is a mitzvah of the Torah. You shall surely bury him on the same day as his death. A person that is that their life is taken from them, it should be buried on the same day. Now, there is a little bit of an exception. We say ideally it should be on the same day. And now we understand the journey of the soul's in limbo, and everything that's happening. We understand we want to have the burial right away, but we also take into account the honor of the deceased, and many times it's difficult to have a funeral the same day. It's done. I was at a funeral a few weeks ago where the person passed Friday morning, 9 or 10 in the morning, and we did the funeral at 2 p.m. and it was, it wasn't last week. It was, maybe a month or two ago, and Shabbos was coming, but the funeral was done before Shabbos because ideally that's what should happen. But most cases, that's not the case. Most of the time, it's not the case. You have family members. This was a small family, right? It was just 2 children, and that's all there was. But many times you have grandchildren, you have siblings, you have cousins, you have relatives that need to come in from out of town. So we can extend the time period for the funeral in order to have more honor for the deceased. If a child won't be able to be at their parents' funeral because you need to do the funeral the same day, that can be very difficult for the child not to have that opportunity. So there are reasons why we can extend the time of the funeral not to take place on the same day as the death. That would really be ideal. But we don't push it off 3 weeks because we had a cruise planned, and we're going to go on a cruise and we'll do the funeral at a more convenient time. No, that's not a good reason to push off a funeral. I'm sorry, the cruise can wait. But the main idea of what we're taking from text number 2 is that it's an actual mitzvah to bury the deceased. Let's take a look at text number 3 from Ecclesiastes. People proceed to their eternal abodes, and the mourners go about the streets. The dust returns to the earth as it was, while the spirit returns to God who bestowed it. We are just custodians of the body. Hashem entrusted us with the care of the body, and the body comes from the earth, and we have a beautiful life. It's entrusted to us as a deposit to work on, and we have to return this deposit to where it came from, because that is Hashem's will. We actually believe in free choice in many areas, but Jewish law says in this case, it's not really something it's not yours. It's not an object that belongs to you that you can decide how you want to use it. The body belongs to Hashem, and therefore you have to return what was given to you on loan. It's not actually yours. Let's take a look at text 14. Rabbi Chaim Vital writes, "For you are dust, and you will return to dust," quoting from Genesis. The body, and he explains, the body comes from the earth, and it is entrusted as a deposit to the individual's care. So our body doesn't belong to us. It's on loan to us from Hashem. And upon death, the deposit must be returned to the earth from where it came and buried there. So we have in the Torah, we have a lot of different stories about burial. Right? What are some that comes to mind? Let's do a little refresher over here. See if your Hebrew school tuition your parents paid was worth it. What are some Jewish stories the Torah tells us about funerals? What about Hebron, the Machpelah cave? Abraham went to Hebron and he purchased a cave called the Machpelah to bury his wife, and his descendants were also buried there as well. Yitzchak and Yishmael were two brothers. They actually made peace, and they buried their father Abraham. The Torah tells us about Yaakov burying Rachel along the road. That's why if you go to Israel, you're like, whoa, what's Rachel's tomb doing over here? She passed away on the side of the road, and that's where she was buried. Yaakov and Yosef both passed away in Egypt and requested very strongly from their descendants that their remains should not stay in Egypt forever, and they should be brought to Israel. So Yaakov, who passed away in Egypt, he was buried in the Machpelah cave in Israel. And Yosef, when he passed away in Egypt, the Egyptians wanted his body to stay there, but by the Exodus, Moshe went and brought Yosef's remains and reinterred his remains in Israel. So we have a couple two fundamental ideas here, right? We believe that our bodies don't belong to us; they belong to God. So it's not up to us to decide how to inter them. And when we bury someone according to the Jewish tradition, we're reinforcing this idea and this belief. We're telling Hashem, thank you for entrusting this body to us, and now we're returning it to you. And there's another big idea, which is the resurrection of the dead. Maimonides teaches, and there are 13 principles of faith that every Jew should have, and these are fundamental beliefs. And one of them is that in the Messianic era, there's going to be the resurrection of the dead. And the resurrection of the dead, you want the body to be there for the resurrection of the dead. If God forbid somebody chooses cremation, then what happens by the resurrection of the dead? They're saying, I'm not interested in the resurrection of the dead. I'm going to get rid of this body. I don't believe that the body has any value to it. Now, we're not judging anyone. That I'm sure that everyone here may have some family or some friends that chose cremation. We're not judging anyone. They didn't take this JLI class, so we can't blame them, right? So if somebody doesn't know, they didn't have the background, they didn't have the education, we're not blaming anyone for their decisions. All we're doing is sharing the Jewish perspective so that we're empowered and we know what the right thing is, but we're not judging other people. We can hopefully influence others if we know people that have plans for cremation, Jewish and non-Jewish. From a Jewish perspective, it's not just a Jewish idea to be buried. We believe that non-Jews should also choose burial. By the way, today there are many green burials, right? Eco-friendly burials. The Jewish burial system is very eco-friendly. There's no fumes, there's no smoke, there's nothing, no toxins being released. In Illinois, there's a law that there has to be a vault. It can be just a frame and a top. It doesn't have to be the vault on the bottom. But so you can have a very eco-friendly a person can have a very eco-friendly burial when they choose to go with the Jewish way of doing things. One of the things I mentioned before was cost. People say, "Hey, burial is so expensive. Cremation is also expensive. $4,000, $5,000 Jewish burial, depending where you go. If you go to Shalom, maybe it's going to cost you $20,000. You go to Waldheim, maybe it's going to be $12,000. I don't know. I'm just throwing out numbers, right? Depending where you go, it's very expensive. Well, you know what? There are a lot of things that are expensive in life. Would anybody say that you shouldn't have a wedding ceremony because it's expensive? So cut out the wedding, right? It's expensive. It costs $100,000, to hire the band and the hall and the food. You can do it for a little cheaper, right? But we say, no, this is a necessity. This is something we need, right? We spend a lot of money on things because we understand that they are important. So when we understand, with this understanding from the Jewish perspective, burial is so important because it's showing the sacredness of the body. It's showing respect and giving respect to the soul, which we say remains connected with the body. So it's not a matter of money. Yes, the funeral homes, they should lower their prices a little bit, but it's not a question of, is it worth it? A little bit cheaper this way, a little bit cheaper that way. It's important and it's essential. So I want to conclude with an uplifting idea. After all this information, I think there's a lot that we spoke about, a lot that we covered, is visiting the grave sites of our loved ones. We're going to skip some of these. So when we visit the grave site of our loved ones, we know again that the soul of that person is there at the gravesite, and we're connecting with that person. I'm not going to do text number 16, but highly recommended. You can take a look at some of the texts after the class, text 16 and text 17. When we visit the gravesite, we're showing respect for the deceased. We're showing that their memory has not been forgotten. And I think most importantly, it reinforces our continuous connection. So we have a tradition where we'll leave a little stone or pebble on the headstone of a grave that we have visited. And one of the reasons for that is maybe you'll find like a round stone. So it shows on the cycle of life, similar to the eggs or bagels that are eaten by the Shiva, which show on the cycle of life. And also it shows that somebody has visited this spot. This person has not been forgotten, and they're still loved and cared for. And it's a sign of a very great respect. Any questions, comments?
Shalom does not let you put stones.
Okay, yes.
They're very adamant about that.
They have a lot of rules, yes.
But we have the things that would be for flowers, and there's a little well in there. So I always put a penny in that
instead of the stone.
It doesn't get sucked up by the lawnmowers.
Yeah.
Or I find a leaf, and I'll put the leaf down.
You're doing something to show that someone was there.
Right. Yeah, because I have my brother-in-law, my late husband, and my grandson are all in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, Shalom they're very pleasant people to work with in the office, and it's a beautiful cemetery, and it's very close by. So only good things to say about them. But part of the upkeep of how they keep the Shalom Memorial Park, they keep it so beautiful, is they do have a lot of rules when you could put out the vases and when you could do this, when you could do that, and they want to maintain everything in a beautiful way. Yeah, go ahead.
We paid an extra expense to have a bench at there, and I find it so reassuring that, in fact, when I picked up the book from your daughter 2 weeks ago, I went to the cemetery, sat down, and read the book to my wife and sat at the bench, and that was very important to have.
Yeah. There's a man across the road. Every time I go there, he's sitting. He has his little chair that he brings, and he sits there, which is very nice. It's very comforting.
He's always there every time?
It seems like it. So I don't know.
Wow.
And I don't go that frequently, but it seems
Right.
like a lot of the times
Like
when
you
I
guys
go,
are aligned, your schedules are aligned, and you're
I don't know. I don't know. It's convenient because, like, when I come up by you, if it's not Shabbos, I usually stop by. Or if I'm
Yeah.
on 53, I wave.
Right. Right.
Can I just say that, this with my mom, it was very comforting because my mom and dad bought their plots and prepaid for their funeral, and it was so much easier on me and my brother and my husband and sister-in-law because we didn't have to deal with that stress, and it really helped me grieve better, if you can really grieve better. But I want to do that for my son so he doesn't have to have that burden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You still have time, Julie. You're still very young, so you
Oh,
don't
I
have to worry.
know. I'm just saying I'm not ready yet, so.
Yeah.
We bought our plots back in 1972 or 73, and my mother kept on saying, "It's so far." And I said, "So far from what?" I mean, they're buried at West Lawn, but
Right.
where
Well,
I go to visit them. And then there's other family at Waldheim, which is an experience in itself.
Yeah, that's
Right.
where my grandparents are born. It's not a good cemetery at all.
I
No,
found
It was a good investment.
Yeah,
there's a Facebook group for Waldheim.
Is it really?
really.
Yes, and
Yeah.
people are posting, can you read this tombstone for me, and all the different sections that people belong to and were buried at. It's interesting.
I found when I went the Corns, which is my maiden name. I was looking for the Corn plot, which I couldn't find. And I said, "But the Shapiros are right over there by the fence." And I said, all this time, the Corns and the Shapiros were in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Well, Shapiro's a
Who
big
knew?
name. They're all
knew?
over.
They do tours at Waldheim too.
Really? Wow.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, Julie.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Sorry.
Good.
I was at Waldheim, I think 2 times actually. And you have the gates, and you have I almost needed to buy new tires after driving through Waldheim.
I remember going there with my dad to see his mom a couple times.
I would have to watch.
There's a lot of deer there that go gambling through. It's
3-minute video that I would have to watch. I don't.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, for the class. It really was very helpful.
Thank you everyone for joining. I encourage you to read. I know it's late, so I was planning on reading text number 18 on page 68, a beautiful text. I'll just share the background of it. So you have a little teaser. This is actually an English letter that the Rebbe wrote to Mrs. Hannah Sharfstein, who was a young woman within a 5-year period, lost her mother, her father, and her mother-in-law.
Oh my
And
God.
Rebbe asking for guidance. She was her emotions were running high. This was really difficult. She was a young mother, and look what she had to deal with. And it's a beautiful letter. But we'll leave that for homework for whoever wants.
You said page 68, text 18?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Rabbi, I have a question, sort of talking about death, but this is about life. My mother told me that when I was born, the nurse told her there was all of a sudden, as I was coming out, a very strong light that came through. And I didn't think about it. She said, could that have been my neshama coming to me?
Your mother told you this?
She said the nurse told her. My mother the nurse told her. And I mean, they had a difficult year the year before because she had lost a child that was 2.5.
Oh, wow.
And my father had a serious accident. But the nurse told her this because my mother was out. I mean, So I was just wondering if they were coming in.
Maybe.
I believe so. Like I said before, I've heard from people I'm not allowed to hang around the labor and maternity ward. You know, they don't let the men go hang out over there, as appropriately so. So I spend unfortunately more time in the ICU, and like I said, people say there's a flash, a light, they felt something, and I think that very well could be that there was such a strong, sense of the neshama at the time of birth is when the neshama enters the body. So I believe that it'll be fair to say, yes, that was probably the
I
soul.
never thought about it until all this came out, because I remember my mother saying something. She said the nurse told her that. And I mean, I was a bratty little kid, but I mean,
I was told
hopefully
that,
I've redeemed myself
I think you turned out okay.
as I've aged.
I was told that when you're born, God touches you right here. That's how we get that little
That's
indentation.
right. Yeah.
So the tradition is the angel gives us a little flick right over there, because when we're in our mother's womb, the angels teach us the whole entire Torah. And we have actually tremendous knowledge. But then the angel says, guess what? It doesn't say this, but the idea is it'll be too easy if you were born with all this knowledge. But we taught you everything so that now you're accustomed to it. It's there deep down. But we're going to give you this little flick. You're going to forget it. But whenever you encounter it, it'll be easier for you to understand and relate to it, because you're coming back to it a second time. You're not really learning it for the first time.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. That's the idea.
Well, thank you so much. This was
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
I hope that everything we spoke about is uplifting and gives added, like I said at the beginning, gives added meaning and insight. This isn't supposed to be a sad or depressing subject. It's supposed to be giving us added light and stronger connection with those that have passed, with our loved ones, with any relatives. And again, we're not here to make anyone sad. It's all supposed to be uplifting, to help us live a more meaningful and connected life. So thank you, everyone, for joining this Shabbos. Linda, you made it last week. Larry,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Larry's
you.
doing a kiddush this Shabbos for his wife's first yahrzeit, which is coming up in exactly a week from today.
And you need a minion next Tuesday, right?
Yes.
Larry? Okay.
Larry, can you hear us?
I'm sorry. Yes.
You need a minion next Tuesday.
Yes, Tuesday morning.
Okay. Irv put it on his calendar. Okay.
Okay, thank you,
everybody.
Okay, have a great week, everyone.
Okay.
You too.
Thank you.